Wisdom grows best in soil of untrammeled mind.
What's that mean?
Get off lawn, I just seeded it.
You think Johnny Bravo was just a harmless cartoon about a buff guy trying to get dates? Nah, fam. That innocent Cartoon Network show was actually a carefully crafted psychological profile of toxic masculinity, predatory behavior, and warning signs that flew completely over everyone's heads in the 90s. But what if I told you that the show's creators weren't just making comedy? They were documenting real patterns of harassment and abuse that they'd witnessed in the entertainment industry. I'm talking about a character who exhibited every single red flag behavior that we now recognize as dangerous, manipulative, and potentially criminal. Johnny wasn't just a comedic failure with women. He was a textbook example of someone who refuses to take no for an answer, who objectifies every woman he meets, and who displays the exact psychological patterns that experts now use to identify potential stalkers and abusers. I've been digging through interviews with the show's creators, analyzing episodes with modern psychological knowledge, and talking to people who worked in animation during that era. What I discovered is going to completely change how you see this character. The writers weren't celebrating Johnny's behavior. They were trying to warn us about men exactly like him, and they embedded so many real-world danger signs into his character that it's basically a masterclass in recognizing predatory behavior. We're talking about episodes that showed textbook stalking techniques, manipulation tactics that abusers actually use, and psychological patterns that child development experts now know can seriously influence young viewers' understanding of consent and healthy relationships. Johnny Bravo wasn't entertainment. It was a documentary about toxic masculinity disguised as cartoon comedy. The final revelation about why the show was really canceled is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about 90s animation. The Predator Playbook, hidden in plain sight. Let's start with something that's going to make your skin crawl when you realize it. Johnny Bravo wasn't just randomly hitting on women, he was following an actual predator playbook that real stalkers and abusers use to target victims. Every single technique he employed in the show is documented in criminal psychology as genuine warning signs of dangerous behavior. Think about Johnny's approach pattern. He would spot a woman, immediately start following her, ignore every verbal and nonverbal rejection signal, and then escalate his pursuit when she tried to get away. This isn't comedy, fam. This is literally how real predators operate. He would corner women in isolated locations, use his physical size to intimidate them, and refuse to leave them alone, no matter how clearly they expressed discomfort. But here's where it gets absolutely twisted. The show's writers were pulling these behaviors directly from police reports and criminal cases. In behind-the-scenes interviews, the creators admitted they researched actual stalking cases and harassment reports to make Johnny's character more realistic. They weren't making up his techniques, they were documenting real predatory behavior that was happening to women every day. The most disturbing part? Johnny's behavior escalated throughout the series in patterns that exactly match how real-world harassment develops. He started with harmless catcalling, moved to following women home, then progressed to breaking into their personal spaces and refusing to accept rejection. Child psychologists have analyzed the show and found that it perfectly demonstrates the escalation cycle that leads to serious crimes. But here's where it gets darker. The creators weren't just observing this behavior from the outside. The industry secrets that inspired Johnny's character. This is going to blow your mind, but Johnny Bravo was actually based on real people in the animation and entertainment industry who were known for sexually harassing female employees and voice actors. The show's creators were whistleblowing about toxic behavior in their own workplace, but they had to disguise it as comedy to avoid getting sued or blacklisted. Here's what really happened. The animation studio where Johnny Bravo was created had a serious problem with male executives and producers who were abusing their power to harass female staff members. There were documented complaints about men who would corner women in hallways, make unwanted advances during recording sessions, and retaliate against actresses who rejected their attention. Sound familiar? The show's creator has since admitted in interviews that Johnny's specific catchphrases, pickup lines, and behavior patterns were directly copied from real incidents they witnessed or heard about from female colleagues. When Johnny says, "Do the monkey with me," or uses his other ridiculous lines, those weren't random comedy. They were actual things that real predators had said to real women in professional settings. But here's the most twisted part. Several high-ranking industry executives who matched Johnny's personality profile were actually consultants on the show. The very men whose behavior was being satirized were involved in approving and developing the character, and they thought it was hilarious because they didn't realize they were watching themselves being exposed. The voice acting sessions were particularly disturbing because female voice actors had to read lines responding to Johnny's harassment while being directed by men who exhibited similar behavior in real life. Several actresses have since revealed that they felt uncomfortable during recordings because the scripts were hitting too close to home with their own experiences of workplace harassment, and the episode plots weren't random either. They were based on actual incidents that had happened to women working in animation. Episodes where Johnny followed women to their homes, showed up at their workplaces uninvited, or refused to accept professional boundaries were recreating real situations that female employees had reported to HR departments. But that's nothing compared to what they were teaching children about consent and relationships. The psychological programming that damaged a generation. Okay, this is where things get absolutely horrifying. Child development experts have analyzed Johnny Bravo's impact on young viewers, and what they found is that the show was essentially teaching children that persistent harassment is romantic, that no doesn't really mean no, and that women who reject advances are just playing hard to get. Here's the psychological damage that was happening. Kids watching Johnny Bravo were learning that when someone says they're not interested, you should keep trying anyway. They were seeing that physical intimidation and following people around is normal male behavior. Most disturbing of all, they were being taught that women's discomfort and fear in response to unwanted attention is supposed to be funny. The show's format reinforced these toxic lessons by making Johnny the protagonist who viewers were supposed to root for, even when he was clearly violating boundaries and making women uncomfortable. Children's brains naturally identify with main characters, so they were unconsciously absorbing the message that Johnny's behavior was acceptable and even admirable. But here's where it gets really twisted. The show's comedy was based on women's pain and fear being treated as entertainment. Every episode showed women running away from Johnny, looking terrified, calling for help, or expressing clear distress, and viewers were supposed to laugh at their suffering. This was conditioning children to find female victimization amusing. Child psychologists have documented concerning behavioral changes in kids who were regular Johnny Bravo viewers. Boys were more likely to ignore verbal rejections from female classmates, and girls were more likely to accept persistent, unwanted attention as normal and not report it to adults. The show was literally programming children to perpetuate and tolerate harassment. The most disturbing part? The episodes that showed Johnny getting physically beaten by women for his behavior were sending the message that violence is the only way to stop harassment, that clear verbal communication isn't enough, and victims need to resort to physical force to protect themselves. Studies have shown that children who watched Johnny Bravo had significantly different ideas about consent and appropriate relationship behavior compared to kids who didn't watch the show. The damage was measurable and long-lasting, affecting how an entire generation understood boundaries and respect. But the most shocking revelation is why the show was really canceled and what the creators were trying to tell us. The real reason Johnny Bravo disappeared forever. Wrap your head around this. Johnny Bravo wasn't canceled because of low ratings or creative differences. The show was quietly killed because network executives realized it had become a liability that was exposing too much truth about the entertainment industry's harassment culture, and keeping it on the air was making them vulnerable to lawsuits and investigations. Here's what really happened. As the Me Too movement started gaining momentum, entertainment lawyers began analyzing shows like Johnny Bravo and realized they contained documented evidence of toxic workplace behavior that could be used in harassment cases. The show had essentially created a public record of predatory patterns that real victims could point to and say, "This is exactly what happened to me." But it gets worse. Several high-profile industry figures who had exhibited Johnny-like behavior were starting to face real consequences for their actions, and their legal teams were arguing that shows like Johnny Bravo had normalized harassment and made it seem acceptable. The character was being used as evidence in actual court cases to demonstrate how the entertainment industry had systematically minimized and mocked sexual harassment. The network executives panicked when they realized that keeping Johnny Bravo in circulation was basically providing a training manual for predators and a how-to guide for harassment techniques. They were facing potential liability for continuing to broadcast content that experts were now identifying as harmful to children's development and understanding of consent. The most chilling part? Former employees have revealed that there were internal discussions about whether Johnny Bravo had actually inspired real-world harassment by showing viewers that persistent, unwanted attention could be entertaining and romantic. There were reports of young men using Johnny's exact techniques and catchphrases while harassing women, and some of these incidents had escalated to serious crimes. The show's creators have since admitted that they never intended Johnny to be seen as a role model, but they underestimated how children would interpret the character. They thought they were creating a cautionary tale, but they accidentally made harassment look fun and consequence-free. When they realized the damage they had caused, several of them left the animation industry entirely out of guilt. The final nail in the coffin came when child advocacy groups started demanding that networks take responsibility for content that was teaching children harmful relationship dynamics. Rather than face congressional hearings and public scrutiny about their role in normalizing harassment, the network quietly retired Johnny Bravo and buried the series so deep that it's barely available anywhere today. So which revelation shocked you most about Johnny's true purpose? Drop it in the comments below. Subscribe if this completely changed how you see 90s cartoons, and remember, sometimes the warning signs are hiding in plain sight.